Welcome to the July 2026 edition of Business and Policy News, brought to you by the Farm Advisory Service. This newsletter helps you to look ahead, prepare for industry developments, and stay up to date with the latest research findings and policy updates. Along with our regular monthly updates on policy, arable, beef, sheep, and milk, in this edition, we will also be looking at potato markets and optical grading technology. Hello. My name is Brady Stevens, and along with this month's guest contributor, I will be presenting this publication. First up, we have this month's news. Second heat wave of 2026 brings more record temperatures. Following the heat wave at the end of May, several people joked that this might be the summer over with. 1 month later, and having experienced a second, much more intense heat wave last week, the jokes have dissipated and farmers are now expressing increasing concern at how many heat waves we might be expected to endure this year. The recent hot weather is starting to have real-time consequences for agriculture, including beyond Scotland and the UK. The latest heat wave was even more extreme across parts of Central Europe, with temperatures in Germany reaching 41.7 degrees Celsius and Poland recording 40.5 degrees Celsius. According to the World Health Organization, Europe is the fastest warming continent on the planet, warming at twice the global average. As Mark Boucher-Gibbs reports in this month's Arable Update, the heat wave across the continent has drawn considerable reaction from grain traders, and European markets are now beginning to factor in crop stress and production risk into their pricing models. For those who want to consider options for businesses to become more water resilient in the future, our further interest section provides details of recent and upcoming webinars which discuss preparations for water scarcity, and an article from Rebecca Audsley which looks at factors to consider when establishing a water resilient business. The hot weather was not entirely the dominant force at this year's Royal Highland Show, with the rain making an appearance on the Thursday and Friday. Although there was no announcement by Scottish Government of another round of the Future Farming Investment Scheme, Agriculture Minister Jim Fairley has confirmed that work on the next £14.25 million scheme is ongoing. PM resignation. The resignation of Sir Keir Starmer as the UK Prime Minister on the 22nd of June means that Andy Burnham is now the clear frontrunner to take over as PM, if he remains unchallenged in the Labour leadership contest. Questions regarding Mr. Burnham's policy priorities have yet to be answered. Defense spending, immigration controls, and the welfare budget are sure to be key areas, along with greater public control of housing, energy, transport, and water. The appointment of a chancellor is crucial. Will Mr. Burnham stick with Rachel Reeves? This is considered unlikely, or will he make a new appointment? Recent reports suggest that Energy Secretary Ed Miliband could be on the shortlist to move into number 11 Downing Street, assuming that Mr. Burnham's bid to become PM is successful. Analysts predict that Mr. Miliband, if appointed, would pursue a more interventionist approach to net zero, and this could well have repercussions for UK farmers further down the line. US-Iran conflict, energy prices, and inflation. With no end to the US-Iran conflict in sight, there still remains a great deal of uncertainty around global energy prices. However, since the Strait of Hormuz has reopened, global energy prices have fallen back. Brent crude oil is now around $73.30 per barrel as of the 30th of June, having reduced from $91 per barrel 1 month ago. Nonetheless, current oil prices remain higher than price levels prior to the conflict. Inflation, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, remains at 2.8%, although there is an expectation that inflation will increase in Q3 of 2026. It's against this backdrop that the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee decided to hold interest rates at 3.75% during the last committee meeting on the 17th of June. The next meeting is scheduled for the 30th of July. At the end of June 2026, the FTSE had risen to 10,593.52 amidst growing optimism around the ceasefire in the Middle East and a lift in sentiment in the markets. In the July edition of Business and Policy News, we have news that prices are finally stabilizing for finishing beef cattle. Strong prices for lamb are gradually easing back, and milk output is now reducing, having reached a peak during the spring flush in May. This edition also considers the implications of the hot weather in the arable sector, and there's our usual policy update from Heather Stewart, including details of EU rules for new genomic techniques, the end of the transition period for fair dealing obligations pigs regulations 2025, research findings on consumer awareness of regenerative farming, a Forestry Grant Scheme budget announcement, and details of the latest report by Scottish Government on agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. In this month's specialist article, Gavin Prentice provides an update on the potato market, where surplus stocks from the 2025 season have had a dramatic effect on financial returns, meaning that growers must focus their minds sharply on monitoring the cost of production in 2026. Gavin's article also gives an insight into the use of optical grading technology, which is being used to help drive improvements to business efficiency in the face of difficulties sourcing reliable labor. Let's take a look at this month's policy briefs. New EU rules on new genomic techniques, NGTs. On the 17th of June 2026, the EU agreed and adopted new rules on new genomic techniques, including gene editing technologies, which allow plant breeders to make precise changes to a plant's DNA without necessarily introducing genes from unrelated species. Under the new framework, NGT plants are split into two categories. NGT1 plants will be treated much like conventionally bred crops and face a simplified approval process, while NGT2 plants, which involve more complex genetic changes, will continue to be regulated under existing GMO rules. The EU says the changes will help breeders develop crops that are more resilient to drought, pests, and disease, and require fewer inputs such as pesticides and fertilizers. Scotland has so far taken a more cautious approach to biotechnology. The EU's decision marks a major shift in agricultural biotechnology policy. For Scotland, it presents both an opportunity to access new breeding technologies that could support productivity and climate adaptation, and a policy challenge around regulation, market access, consumer acceptance, and intellectual property. Pig contract regulations. The 13th of August 2026 marks the end of the 12-month transition period for the UK's Fair Dealing Obligations Pigs Regulations 2025, meaning that from this date, all pig purchase contracts must comply with the new rules, which are designed to improve fairness and transparency in the pig supply chain. The regulations require contracts between pig producers and purchasers to be in writing, signed, and to contain clearly defined terms on pricing, contract duration, volumes, termination agreements, and dispute resolution. Introduced under powers in the Agriculture Act 2020, the rules aim to give producers greater certainty and protection. The regulations came into force for all new contracts on the 13th of August 2025, but existing agreements were granted a 12-month transition period, which expires on the 13th of August 2026. Compliance is overseen by the Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, ASCA, acting on behalf of the Secretary of State. The ASCA will carry out enforcement functions under the new regulations. Growing consumer awareness of regenerative agriculture. Agricultural Commodity Trader and Processor ADM commissioned research to understand European consumer perceptions of regenerative agriculture. According to ADM's research across 5 European countries, awareness of regenerative agriculture is particularly strong in the UK. Around 73% of UK consumers say they have heard of regenerative agriculture, one of the highest levels recorded in the survey, although many are still unfamiliar with what the term means in practice. Despite this knowledge gap, perceptions are overwhelmingly positive. 73% of UK respondents believe regenerative agriculture improves soil health, and 74% believe it helps protect food supplies for future generations. The research also found that consumers increasingly associate regenerative agriculture with restoring ecosystems, improving biodiversity, and supporting sustainable food production. When consumers were shown products with regenerative agriculture messaging on the packaging, 81% of UK, 78% of German, 76% of Polish, 75% of French, and 63% of Dutch consumers said they would purchase the product. Importantly for food and drink businesses, this highlights the growing influence of regenerative farming claims on purchasing decisions, particularly in the UK. While consumer understanding is still developing, it would seem that regenerative agriculture is gaining significant traction with UK shoppers and presents an opportunity for brands that can communicate its benefits clearly and credibly. Forestry Grant Scheme budget increased for 2026-27. Scottish Forestry has announced an indicative Forestry Grant Scheme budget of £58.65 million for 2026-27, an increase of £5.65 million over last year's confirmed budget. The additional funding is primarily targeted at woodland creation, with the scheme expected to support up to 12,000 hectares of new woodland during 2026-27. Scottish Forestry has also simplified the application process by placing all woodland creation applications of 50 hectares or more, including reduced grant requirement proposals, into a single funding category. Alongside this, an extra £300,000 has been allocated to encourage woodland expansion through natural regeneration, while £100,000 has been added to the Sustainable Management of Forest budget to strengthen the management of Scotland's native woodlands. Funding also remains available through the Harvesting and Processing Grant. This option supports investments in two main areas: new specialized equipment, which will increase the small-scale harvesting and processing capacity, and new specialized equipment for forest tree nurseries. An additional application round will open during 2026 for projects due to be completed by the 31st of March 2027, with applications closing on the 31st of July 2026. Latest estimates for agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. The Scottish Government published its latest Scottish Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Nitrogen Use 2024-25 statistics. In 2024, Scottish agriculture emitted 7.5 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is the second lowest level recorded since current records began in 1990. An increase in emissions from fuel combustion was offset by reductions across all other emissions sources. The long-term fall in emissions from agriculture is largely driven by falling livestock numbers. Suckler beef remained the largest emitting subsector, accounting for 41.2% of total agricultural emissions. Emissions from this sector have fallen by 0.7 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is 18.8% since 1990. Average emissions intensity for cereal production rose by 14% to 293 kilos of CO2 equivalent per ton of crop on cereal farms, and by 6% to 258 kilos of CO2 per ton on general cropping farms, compared with 2023-24. This increase was mainly driven by higher diesel use across arable businesses, with increased fertilizer use on some general cropping farms also contributing. In 2024-25, average farm emissions were stable at 4.2 tons of CO2 equivalent per hectare. Increased diesel emissions for 2024-25 were offset by reduced fertilizer use across most farm types compared with 2023-24. Overall, the figures show continued progress in reducing total agricultural emissions, while also highlighting the ongoing challenges of cutting emissions intensity and improving nutrient efficiency. For more information on any of the policies, updates, and articles in this edition, please see the show notes, where you will find numerous links to relevant websites, publications, consultations, and further sources of information. To conclude this month's policy briefs, we have two key dates to note. The 31st of July 2026 is the AICS organic application deadline. And from the 1st of June to the 9th of September 2026, blue tongue movement restrictions remain in place. Moving on to arable. Market overview. After several weeks of subdued trading, grain markets have finally found something to get excited about. The intense heat wave stretching across much of Western and Central Europe has forced traders to reassess crop potential, particularly for maize and later developing spring crops. Prices have responded accordingly, with European futures recovering sharply from recent lows. The interesting part is that Europe and the United States are currently telling completely different stories. European markets are pricing in worsening crop stress, shrinking maize acreage, and increasing production risk, while Chicago continues to trade as though very little has changed. Across much of the U.S. Corn Belt, crops remain in good condition, rainfall has generally been timely, and weather forecasts continue to favor development. One of those markets will eventually have to give. For now, European traders are focused firmly on the weather. A second spell of very hot temperatures arrived during early July, and with many spring crops approaching their most sensitive growth stages, every day without meaningful rainfall increases the risk of lower yields and poorer quality. July has become the month that could define this marketing year. Looking now at individual crops, we begin with wheat. Wheat has inevitably been pulled higher by the strength in maize, although its own fundamentals remain rather more uncertain, with November 2026 futures currently at 177 pounds per ton. The first combines are now rolling through France, and early reports suggest yields are around 10 to 15% below the 5-year average. That's disappointing rather than disastrous because, with much of the French crop now close to maturity, the recent heat is unlikely to cause significant further damage there. Elsewhere, however, the story is rather different. Crops across the UK, Germany, and Poland are still filling grain just as temperatures climb towards 40 degrees Celsius in some areas. Whether these conditions leave a lasting mark on yields will become clearer over the next fortnight, but they are certainly enough to keep a weather premium in the market. Not everywhere is struggling. Romania is expected to produce one of its largest wheat crops on record, helping offset losses elsewhere, while Russian and Ukrainian exporters continue to dominate the world trade with competitively priced wheat. That remains one of the biggest brakes on any sustained rally. Despite lower production estimates for Russia, global buyers still have plenty of choice, and export competition remains fierce. Moving on to maize. If there's one market leading the grains complex at the moment, it's maize. European maize futures have surged to their highest levels of the season as traders increasingly price in the impact of heat stress alongside a much smaller planted area. At the time of writing, Matif maize is trading above milling wheat, something we don't often see, and a clear indication of how concerned the market has become about production. For reference, Matif is a futures exchange corporation. Across the Atlantic, the picture couldn't be more different. Around 68% of the U.S. corn crop is currently rated good or excellent, and aside from some localized heavy rainfall, conditions remain close to ideal. It's rare to see such a wide gap in sentiment between Europe and the U.S., and it probably won't last forever. Barley. Barley markets continue to be divided into two distinct stories. Winter barley is now very much a harvest market. Most old crop stocks have already been sold, consumers appear comfortably covered, and attention is turning towards how quickly the new crop can reach the market. Assuming harvest progresses without interruption, seasonal selling pressure is likely to build through July. Malting barley is proving rather more interesting. The prolonged heat across Europe is causing increasing concern over grain quality, particularly nitrogen levels, while early French yields are reportedly well below last year's performance. Farmer selling also remains notably absent, limiting liquidity and providing a degree of support to prices despite relatively sluggish demand from maltsters. For the UK, the outlook remains finely balanced. Reduced planted area and questions over quality could tighten supplies considerably, although demand for brewing, malting, and distilling barley will ultimately determine whether any rally can be sustained. Oilseeds. Rapeseed has quietly recovered after a period of consolidation. Despite weaker crude oil prices, support has come from firmer palm oil values, uncertainty surrounding sunflower production, and continuing concerns over global vegetable oil supplies. The wider oilseed market remains heavily influenced by macroeconomic factors. Favorable U.S. soybean conditions and a lack of fresh Chinese buying continue to weigh on sentiment, while speculative fund activity and currency movements have added to day-to-day volatility. Weather, however, remains the biggest unknown, particularly with the prospect of El Niño strengthening later in the year. For reference, the El Niño Southern Oscillation is a temporary warming of the Pacific Ocean that has a strong influence on global weather in some years, causing heavy rains in some places and severe droughts in others. Finally, we consider oats and pulses. These markets remain firmly in wait-and-see mode. Oat buyers are reluctant to commit until they have a clearer picture of both yield and quality, while growers remain equally reluctant sellers at current price levels. The heat across Europe is undoubtedly causing concern, particularly for spring oats, but the extent of any damage won't become clear until harvest gathers pace. Scandinavian production will remain one of the key indicators to watch, given its importance to European milling oat supplies. Pulse crops are facing similar challenges. Peas and beans have both come under increasing stress following months of limited rainfall, and although UK vining pea harvest has started with mixed results, it is still far too early to judge the overall crop. Consumer demand also remains relatively quiet, with buyers preferring to wait until harvest quality is better understood before extending forward cover. Grain prices for July 2026 are as follows. Wheat, £180 per ton. Feed barley, £156 per ton. Beans, £215 per ton. Feed oats, £123 per ton. And oilseed rape for November 2026 is £428 per ton. Let's take a look at the latest from the beef sector. Finished prices stand on. After several months of sharp falls in finished cattle prices, with many finishers having suffered losses of approximately £240 per head since February 2026, it looks as though beef prices are now beginning to stabilize around £6 per kilo deadweight. While the current beef price is undoubtedly seeing finisher margins squeezed, it will come as a welcome relief to finishers that beef prices are looking to swing back in favor of the producer. For the week ending the 20th of June, Scottish R4L price was quoted at 597 pence per kilo deadweight, up 1.8 pence from the previous week. At the time of writing, reports suggest that Angus sired cattle are now back over 600 pence per kilo. Prices in the live ring are also showing signs of recovery, with auctioneers commenting that cattle prices have been getting more dear as trade starts to pick up again. The unsustainable lift in prices in 2025 created disruption in the marketplace and undoubtedly a false economy. While finished prices continue to track behind 2025 levels, compared to 2024 values, prices are up by more than £1 per kilo deadweight for the week ending the 22nd of June 2024. Notably, prices in Ireland have continued to fall back 6 to 7 pence per kilo to an average of £5.41 per kilo for the week ending June 2026. There are no serious price rises anticipated, given that demand generally drops throughout the summer. However, with school holidays and consumers holidaying abroad, signs are emerging that the market is beginning to stabilize. This will be a welcome relief for finishers and help to install confidence again. Consumer demand for beef remains sluggish, with many households faced with increased food bills. In May, The Guardian News reported food prices such as beef have risen 64% over 5 years, with pasta, frozen vegetables, chocolate, and eggs all at least 50% more expensive than 5 years ago. Demand for beef is limited not just in households, but in the catering and hospitality sector also, and butchers are also feeling the effect in the marketplace. With Scotland now out of the FIFA World Cup, hopes for increased beef demand are fading. Although it was hoped that Scotland getting to the World Cup would boost barbecue demand, the recent heatwave has created strong demand for manufacturing beef, as the improved summer weather will see consumers getting their barbecues going. Cull cow trade. Similar to finished prices, cow prices remain fairly static over the past month. For the week ending the 20th of June, prices quoted for cows in Scotland were around 525 pence per kilo deadweight, with reports of 530 to 540 pence per kilo, depending on the abattoir. GB cow prices for June have averaged 530 pence per kilo. In 2025, prices for June averaged between £5.52 to £5.58 per kilo. Notably, data from AHDB for the last 4 weeks highlights a drop in cow supplies by 2,900 head compared with the same 4 weeks in 2025. Demand is increasing for cows and manufacturing beef as processors look to meet increased business for barbecue meat, especially burgers. Store cattle trade remains resilient. Despite fluctuations in finished prices, trade for store cattle remains buoyant, with stores continuing to achieve strong prices, largely due to simple supply and demand. The contraction to suckler cow numbers means that finishers are having to compete to secure stock, which is helping to maintain store cattle trade. Although store prices are good, finished cattle prices have impacted the trade for heavier stores, with several markets commenting that lighter, longer keep cattle are topping the trade. Our beef article concludes with a look at global supplies and imports. Imported beef is seen in many stores, with notable increases in Australian, New Zealand, and Brazilian beef on supermarket shelves. Tesco stores have seen significant levels of ABP Irish beef, even though the agreement is 70% British and 30% Irish in a year. Reports suggest that global beef production is expected to fall by 2.2% in 2026. Beef production is already down by 2.5% year on year for the first quarter of 2026. Major contractions are expected in the United States, Brazil, and China, which will likely continue to drive this overall reduction.
If you're enjoying listening to business and policy news, why not try one of the other Farm Advisory Service podcasts? In the latest episode of Agriculture, Mary Jane Laurie is joined by Lauren Houston from Glenkilry Larder, who tells us about her family farming business. They farm cattle, sheep, and deer and started selling their produce directly to consumers through farmers' markets. Lauren is passionate about producing high-quality local food. This passion led her to campaign to improve the quality of the food available in local schools and to showcase their seasonal produce through the Glenkilrie Cook School. Tune into this episode to find out more.
Moving on to sheep. Tightened supply supports a strong market into summer. The GB deadweight SQQ lamb price has remained largely steady over the start of June from its high in late May of 944.1 pence per kilo. With old season lamb supplies very much coming to an end, domestic supply has remained tight towards the start of the month, with lower numbers of new season lambs coming forward across the UK. However, with more new season lamb now starting to reach a finish following a flush of grass, we have seen prices ease as we pass the midway point of the month, with a similar pattern seen for both dead and live weight lambs sold, following typical seasonal trends. Prices remain strongly ahead of this time last year, however. According to AHDB, looking at the third week in June 2025 versus 2026, a 21 kilo carcass is worth an additional 33 pounds compared to last year, and a 42 kilo live weight lamb is worth an additional 27 pounds per head. At mid-June, the country had just come through a heat wave, which particularly affected southern areas of the UK, and this may steady supply due to further grazing pressure as we move through the summer. Average cull ewe price has also remained steady, sitting between 144 to 147 pounds per head, up by around 12 pounds 50 per head year on year for the week ending the 20th of June. Cull ewe numbers are expected to remain steady until around August or September, when we typically see a larger number of cull ewes come onto the market post-weaning. Southern Hemisphere Import Update. AHDB's latest import update highlights that New Zealand has been hitting historical highs following flock contractions leading to reduced lamb supplies. However, there have been signs of easing, with recovery expected as New Zealand nears the end of their season and numbers decrease. Supply in New Zealand has been better than expected following a good lambing and favorable conditions. However, the lamb cull has been down by around 5% year on year so far for 2026. New Zealand remains the UK's import frontrunner, contributing around 11% of all lamb imported into the UK. But with supplies tightening and New Zealand looking at other markets, New Zealand imports are looking likely to reduce, with volume having decreased by 16% so far this year. The 16% decrease to UK imports from New Zealand is being offset by an increase of Australian lamb imports, which increased by around 15% for the same period, although still below quota levels. Like New Zealand, Australian farm gate prices remain high due to tight domestic supply, primarily due to challenging seasonal conditions in southern Australia, reducing lamb production. However, Australian carcass weights have increased following changes to breeding and feeding systems. Longer term, Australian meat and livestock are expected to see some steady recovery in production over the next couple of years, although export growth to the UK is predicted to be moderate, with closer markets being a priority. Capitalizing on opportunity this summer. With prices strong, there is opportunity to capitalize on margins to optimize potential profits from sheep this season. To make the most of favorable market prices, now is a good time to review performance of the sheep system to optimize profits. For example, is weight gain on track for target slaughter age on farm? Are ewes performing as expected? How is grazing holding up to summer challenges? How many lambs are finished on grazing alone? What, if any, are the limiting factors to reaching performance targets? Should creep feed be considered to increase gain as grazing quality drops in later summer? Now is as good a time as any to take stock and review system performance to ensure the business can best take advantage of the strong market. QMS campaign highlights strong prospects for the Scottish sheep sector. At Scott Sheep this year, QMS launched the next round of their Meeting the Potential campaign, where they have been focusing on sheep. Highlights of the campaign included the opportunity to increase sheep production in Scotland by 4,300 tons, requiring 5% more ewes at current production rate to meet demand, with a potential value of £77 million in output and increasing gross value added to the Scottish economy by £21 million. This was predominantly due to strong export opportunities, but also due to domestic demand drivers such as increased demand for protein and reduction in numbers in England. With 90% of Scotland's sheep in less favored areas as of June 2025, this brings massive potential to remote areas of the country. Changes to greening rules mean that more farmers will be considering establishing green cover crops this year. This change will bring an opportunity to integrate more sheep into arable rotations with the potential for improved soil structure, health, and production. Our final industry update looks at milk. Milk production data. Milk production is declining and the spring flush has well and truly passed. The latest data from AHDB estimates the GB milk volume for May at 1,167 million litres, 19 million litres less than the previous May. Daily production is currently 35.97 million litres for the week ending the 20th of June, 1.2% less than the previous week and 1.4% less than the same week last year. For the UK, May milk volumes were 1,454 million litres, which is 54 million litres, 3.5% more than the previous month, and 4 million litres, 0.27% less than May 2025. Turning to farm gate prices. The DEFRA farm gate milk price for May 2026 was 34.20 pence per litre, down 0.15 pence per litre, that's 0.4% from the April price and 21% lower than 12 months ago. Graham's announced price holds for July, with First Milk and Arla announcing a price increase. The organic milk price is currently around 56 pence per litre. The following Scottish milk prices are quoted in pence per litre. First Milk for July, 31.35. Mueller and Mueller Direct for June, 34.5. Graham's for July, 34.5. Arla Farmers for July, 37.24. And Lactalis Fresh Milk Co. for June, 31.24. Dairy commodities and market indicators. This month has brought further challenges for markets, with conditions deteriorating towards the end of the reporting period. Trading has been exceptionally quiet, with high inventories of some commodities weighing on sentiment. While seasonal slowdowns are typical ahead of the European summer holidays, market activity this year has been particularly subdued. UK milk production has remained below last year's levels since April, creating some spare processing capacity, although comparisons are against exceptionally high volumes. Meanwhile, strong European milk supplies continue to pressure the wider market, and with substantial products still in storage, any recovery is expected to be gradual. Skimmed milk powder eased back from the highs reached last month, bringing an end to the positive start to 2026. The price is corrected to align with more competitive levels in other markets. This has resulted in a decline of £210 per tonne. The average price for the period was £2,290. Mild cheddar. The cheddar market has experienced similar conditions to last month, with supply and demand being balanced. Some traders are looking to sell the commodity at cheaper prices, which is pulling the overall value down slightly. The average price for the period was £2,890, losing a further £50 per tonne. Bulk cream was the strongest performing commodity in the period, supported by tightening milk supplies. Average prices increased significantly compared with the previous reporting period, although they have eased off slightly in recent weeks. The premium over EU prices remains too high to encourage trade flows, while demand is also reported to be softening. The average price for the reporting period was £1,387 per tonne. Butter remained under pressure due to high milk volumes and substantial stocks. Demand was reported to be very limited, with prices coming under further pressure ahead of the summer holidays. Butter prices are now well below cream returns, which should discourage production in the short term. Demand remains weak, with market activity reported to be incredibly quiet. As a result, prices continue to decline, falling by a further £90 per tonne to £3,240 per tonne, the lowest level since July 2021. There was a very small increase in actual milk price equivalent and a small fall in milk for cheese value equivalent in May. The milk market value indicator reduced by 1.12 pence per litre to 33.60 pence per litre for June. The latest global dairy trade auction on the 16th of June shows a decline of 2.8% in price when compared to the previous auction, with the average price across all products reaching $3,979 per tonne. Rabobank Global Outlook. Rabobank has stated in their quarterly update that the global milk production is slowing after a period of rapid expansion, signaling a return to a better balance between supply and demand. The bank has forecast that milk production will finish quarter 2 1.5% higher than last year before flattening in quarter 3 and falling by 1.6% in quarter 4. The slowdown follows 4 consecutive quarters of strong growth, with annual production peaking at 5.2% at the end of 2025, which is one of the largest increases on record. Rabo Research senior dairy analyst Michael Harvey said higher feed and input costs, tighter farm margins, and uncertain milk prices are expected to curb production. Weather risks, including a potential strong El Niño and ongoing geopolitical tensions, could also affect global dairy markets. Our milk article concludes with some interesting research on mastitis detection. Research conducted on 80 dairy farms in Ireland found that routine forest stripping increased mastitis detection by up to 146%, suggesting many cases are being missed. There were 40 control farms that continued standard milking practices, while 40 did a week of forest stripping 3 times across the 13-month trial window. The intervention farms were provided with a strip cup, which aids the visible detection of clots or other abnormalities in the milk. PhD student Rachel Millar said forest stripping should be used year-round, not just during particular times of the year, as earlier detection can improve treatment success and help reduce the spread of infection. The study found environmental bacteria were the main cause of clinical mastitis, with Streptococcus uberis the most common pathogen, followed by E. coli and Staphylococcus aureus. Detection increased during each intervention period, rising by 16% in spring, 119% in summer, and 146% in winter, highlighting the value of regular forest stripping throughout the year. The preliminary findings were presented at the British Mastitis Conference in June 2026.
Hi, my name's Gavin Prentice. I'm a senior potato consultant with SEC Consulting. My article looks at the potato markets and optical grading technology. The legacy of the 2025 potato season will be one to remember, but for all the wrong reasons. A large oversupply and limited demand across the UK and Europe have resulted in surpluses up and down the supply chain. It's even got to the stage that anaerobic digestion plants are closing their doors on spuds, and stock feed merchants are offering zero payment for potatoes delivered. Growers with unsold stock in cold storage are in a precarious position. Rack up the energy bills by keeping potatoes sprout free for limited or no recompense, or switch them off. Save some money on electricity, but struggle to find a home and lose potentially thousands of tonnes of produce. There will be a few holes dug this season, unfortunately. Stocks with poor or even average skin finish quality without a sales contract will struggle to find a home, especially as new crop works its way into the market. It's difficult to calculate what volume has been disposed of so far and what is still likely to be left over. It's not something that many wish to disclose. It's possible the figures could be in the tens of thousands of tonnes already discarded across the UK. Although of little consolation, the situation is worse on the continent. Figures for unsold crop are into the millions of tonnes, and in some countries, growers are paying around €25 per tonne to get rid of it. It's devastating for growers to dump perfectly good, edible crop, but more significantly, it's financially disastrous. The problem has been compounded by higher than normal input costs for the planting of the 2026 crop. So, how have we got ourselves into this position? Over the previous 2 seasons, prior to 2025, potato markets experienced strong demand and prices. Both domestic trade and export were profitable across seed and ware sectors, so the temptation for many was to plant more acres. This led to a significant increase in seeded area in 2025. Underperforming arable markets deepened the problem and influenced decision-making. Consumer habits have changed too. Many households eat far fewer fresh spuds than they used to. Despite a recent rise in demand for processed potatoes, crisp sales, for example, still fall short of peak levels experienced during the 1990s. Nonetheless, agriculture is a resilient industry, and many farming enterprises will have lived through countless market peaks and troughs over the years. Many have planned this year's potato production with attention to detail, considering ways to increase efficiency across production. To this end, the cost of production will be monitored more closely than ever before and contracts seen as essential. Some growers and merchants have reduced their potato planting this season, but as other crops remain unattractive prospects, landlords were open to negotiation on additional tatty rents. Judging by the number of potato fields scattered across the countryside, I fear we're in for another roller coaster ride. Investment is challenging during times of market depression. However, across the sector, many have moved towards machine solutions, helping deliver precision whilst optimizing workloads. The development, progress, and expansion of robotic technology, especially optical potato grading, has boomed in recent years. Specifically, optical graders which can be integrated on farm, sorting and separating unwashed crop. Growers are keen to understand this technology and how it might deliver higher marketable yields, consistent product quality and skin finish while potentially reducing labour. So, how do they work? Optical graders are machines that use advanced imaging systems, sensors, and machine learning technology such as artificial intelligence. These machines can sort unwashed potatoes either by sizing the tubers, removing skin blemish defects, damaged or rotten tubers, foreign objects, or everything in between all at once, providing immediate profitability gains. Optical machines come in different shapes and sizes. Each perform tasks in different ways depending on the type of hardware and software installed, although most follow a similar process, which can be broken down into 5 steps. 1. Image capture, using high-resolution and multispectral cameras or sensors similar to 3D imagery. 2. Data analysis. Images are then processed using software algorithms and machine learning. 3. Sorting criteria. Criteria are set based on predefined conditions such as tuber size, shape, length, or quality. 4. Removal of faults. Produce that doesn't meet the criteria is removed using pressurized air, carrying cups, rollers, or mechanical finger paddles. And 5. Real-time changes. The last step involves adjustments such as frequency of removal, size alterations, and reporting. Investment in optical solutions requires large capital investment, and it's wise to investigate grant funding opportunities where available. Optical machines range in price from $100,000 up to $500,000 plus. However, payback could be relative to labour savings, improved grading accuracy, higher saleable yields, fewer rejections, and improved seed health. For instance, installing a quality selecting optical machine might result in 2 less people required on the picking table, offering a reduced staffing cost. In addition, optical graders can work for as long as necessary, decreasing the barrier of natural human fatigue during repetitive tasks over long periods of time. Optical machines can also work past normal working hours, which is essential during peak delivery periods, and more importantly, they don't complain after 5 o'clock. The cleaner a box or sample is going through the machine, the more confident the optical unit will be at correctly identifying the object or issue. Therefore, reducing stone content, haulm, lumps of earth, or adhering soil on tubers is wise, and most growers deploy pickers on harvesters to help. Effectively, the more presentable a stalk is, the more accurate the frequency of removal will be. Machines' work rate can range from 6 to 60 tonnes per hour, depending on the type of grader. As potatoes are a naturally perishable product, optical sorters have their limitations too. Although they are highly advanced and always strive for 100% accuracy, it's likely they will seldom achieve this. Most run at 80 to 95% accuracy. Nonetheless, this is still impressive precision, especially when considering manual selection involves human perception, which can be subjective and prone to errors. What one picker might consider a defect, another might not, leading to inconsistency of fault removal. Optical grading technology is continually improving. Hardware on machinery is unlikely to change much in the future, but the software will. Most companies expect payment of annual software subscriptions to help continue and improve machine learning, which means the technology is advancing substantially every year. This helps improve accuracy, capacity, and decision-making speeds. Sourcing and training reliable labour is a challenge. Sorting and grading potatoes may seem simple, but anyone who has done it knows how tricky it can be. While human pickers are skilled at spotting defects, it's a slow, labour-intensive job, and mistakes are easy to make when millions of tubers move across the line each day. Using optical grading machines can greatly improve productivity, working faster and more consistently, providing consistent quality of product. Optical potato grading machines have become popular, reliable, and readily available. Maybe they're part of the jigsaw puzzle that will help solve some of our market woes.
Business and Policy News has links in the show notes to allow you to dig deeper into further articles of note. This month, we have 3 top picks. At number 1, ensuring a resilient water supply for your farm. Rebecca Audsley's article explains that with significant shifts in our climate, more sectors are looking at ways to ensure that they have the water they need at times of scarcity. Efficient water management is becoming increasingly important. Measures such as water audits, metering, monitoring, improved irrigation practices, leak prevention, soil health improvements, and the adoption of smart technologies are helping farms reduce costs and improve resilience. To safeguard future production and profitability, farms are encouraged to assess their water use, explore alternative water sources, such as boreholes, storage lagoons, ponds, and rainwater harvesting systems, and make use of tools such as SEPA's water scarcity reports and drought risk assessment tool to monitor conditions and plan ahead. In it 2, precision weed control powered by artificial intelligence. Developed by Soils Essentials, the SK AI Spot Sprayer is an advanced AI-powered system designed for precision weed control. In this episode of FAS TV, contractor Richard Young shares his insights on the potential benefits of this technology. We also hear from Peter Beattie, Monitor Farm facilitator, and Callum Smith from the Strathspey Monitor Farm, as they explain how the system is being used in practice to target docks and other weeds more effectively. Staying with AI, our third special feature pick is a podcast about the use of AI in poultry. In this episode of Stock Talk, we hear from David Speller from OptiFarm. David is a poultry farmer who had lots of data but not enough time to analyze it. David tells us about the AI tool he developed to help him make better informed decisions, which attracted the eyes of investors, leading to his company, OptiFarm. David explains how the tool works and the benefits of using AI in livestock systems, including the use of real-time data to be proactive in terms of livestock management and welfare, and how this can improve livestock performance and profitability. You can view the original version of the article, listen to the podcast, and watch FAS TV using the links provided in the show notes. And if you have any questions, please email advice@fas.scot. From all the business and policy team, thank you very much for listening to this audio edition of Business and Policy News. Remember to like Business and Policy News to get notified of future episodes of this monthly podcast. Our next edition is due out on the 10th of August. A written version of this newsletter is available on the FAS website. To receive a copy each month, search for FAS newsletters and subscribe to Business and Policy. This newsletter was edited by Alistair Beattie and included articles written by Alistair Beattie, Heather Stewart, Mark Boucher-Gibbs, Sarah Balfour, Lorna Shaw, Kira Sanikin, and Gavin Prentice. This podcast is produced in association with Scottish Government and was presented by me, Brady Stevens, produced by Heather Stewart, edited by Cameron Waugh, with executive producers Kirsten Blackwood and Carrie Hammond.